Hey folks, welcome back to the bench. Today we're going to be doing something that's a little bit outside the norm for this channel. We're going to be taking apart this Taurus Model 85. I know most of you guys are probably Smith Wesson and Colt enthusiasts based on my normal videos, but this one here has been in the family for, about 30 years probably, somewhere around there. It's the early 90s. And I recently took it apart because it had a little problem. The cylinder was not stopping on the cylinder stop. Cylinder stop wasn't coming up to stop the cylinder. And so I said, okay, well, everyone says these are just a Smith & Wesson copy, basically. So I can take it apart and figure out what's going on. And it is not a Smith & Wesson inside. It is definitely a design of its own. This grip's a little bit stubborn. There we go. Get that out of the way. And for the side plate screws here, I'm using a Grace USA G3 screwdriver. It fits pretty nicely. And of course, I'm going to keep my screws in order. I don't think it matters on this revolver, but just a good habit to get into. And this, of course, is a disassembly video, but it's not going to be just pure disassembly, because I'm going to stop and talk about some of the interesting differences between this and I guess what you could call the more mainstream revolvers, because it is quite a bit different inside. Externally, very similar to a Smith & Wesson, of course, but once we get into it, not so much. Got those to the side. Go ahead and actually, let me see if I can get the cylinder out first, just to make this a little easier on us. And the interesting thing on this is it actually is dependent on where the cylinder is rotated to. You actually need to line up one of the flutes with kind of the frame here, and the flute kind of acts as a relief cut so that you can extract this nice and smooth. Otherwise it will impact the edge of the cylinder here. You can't quite get it out. Let's set this to the side for just a second before we take off the side plate. I thought this was really interesting. On the Colts and Smith Wessons I'm familiar with, for the cylinder stop, they have a little coil spring in there. This actually has a little plunger right here. This little plunger is actually what is operating your cylinder stop. And underneath it, it has a little spring and just resides down that little bore there. And the problem with this revolver and why it wasn't actually stopping the cylinder is that this had developed some rust on it, and you can actually see some remnants of it there, because I haven't totally cleaned it up yet. Put a little oil on it just to see if that would fix everything, and it did, but I need to get a little bit of that gunk away. But yeah, that was the problem, but let's keep on exploring it and we'll learn a little bit more. Go ahead and take the cylinder apart real quick. I'm just going to apply some pressure to the extractor star, turn this clockwise. I've already had this apart and I haven't tightened it back down real tight. Usually you would need to put a little masking tape on this and then use a tool, but it is a reverse thread, so I am spinning clockwise to remove it. Comes off. Your extractor rod there, your center pin spring comes off, was essentially your extractor spring there, and then the extractor star comes out the back, has a little groove in it to line up in the cylinder, and this appears, as best I can tell, to be kind of crimped in the center pin, so that doesn't come out. Set it aside. Taurus has an interesting design here that's a little bit different than what I'm used to, where there's a collar inside of here that is retaining the crane. Folks say that you can just pull on that, I guess, and I'm thinking no. Or I'm thinking you probably can, but this one's really tight, and so I don't want to damage something, so I'm going to leave that together because it's working fine. No reason to risk damaging something over just making a copy of a video that you can see elsewhere. So I've got my side plate loosened up. Just going to go ahead, tap it off, set that at the side. And it's kind of interesting in here. You can take a paper clip. I've got to pull back on the thumb piece so that the bolt retracts. I can squeeze the trigger. I can push this paper clip into this hole in the main spring strut, just like so. And then when I release tension on the trigger, the main spring strut with the spring, this little cup, come off all as one assembly, and just leave the paper clip inside. Going beyond that, now we can go ahead and try to take out this trigger spring and do the same kind of thing where we're going to pull back on the thumb piece so the bolt moves out of the way until I expose on the trigger spring strut a small little hole in the back of it. We take another paper clip here, put it in, release the tension, and now it is retained there. This one is quite snug, not super snug, but you just need to give it a little. There we go. Comes out. We're just going to leave it together as one assembly. And we'll go ahead, pull back on the thumb piece again, get that hammer partially cocked, and when it finds its happy place, where does it like to be? I think it's about right here. There it is. That comes out. Pretty conventional hammer. This is using a transfer bar type safety mechanism. So you have the little protrusion there on the top end of it, a little double action dog there. Pretty typical, nothing really to talk about on the hammer. To me, what's really interesting though is when we get down here to the trigger. You'll see that the transfer bar is pretty much the same as like it is on the 2020 Python. Nothing really much to say about it. But what you have is the way the hand goes on, I think is kind of cool. So to remove the hand, we can just pull back on it and lift it up. A little tricky to do, and I want to make sure I don't scratch the back of the frame there. But it comes up, and you'll see that it has 3 studs protruding off of it. Get this light up a little bit. It has 3 studs protruding off of it. One of them, the center one here, is what it pivots on. The bottom one actually interfaces with a little plunger on the trigger that is what's tensioning the hand. So instead of that whole arm mechanism like you see in the Colts, or the little coiled spring, it's not coiled spring, what do you call that thing? A torsion spring. The torsion spring that you see in the Smith & Wessons, this is using just a simple coil spring pushing a plunger on the back of the trigger that works against this bottom stud while it pivots about the middle one so that it keeps that push forward. Now the top stud, what it's doing, let's get the trigger out maybe so we can see a little better. And I'm going to have to turn this kind of upside down to get the cylinder stop out of the way, because it's blocking the trigger right now. And let's go ahead and just push it out of the way with the screwdriver. This should, there it is. So the trigger comes out. And you can see that it just has this plunger on the back end of it. See it right there? And that, whenever I'll turn this over, that, whenever the hand is on it, is tensioning the hand, like so. I thought that was kind of cool, that you don't have that torsion spring or any great complexity to it. It's a fairly simple design and really easy to get the hand off. Just thought that was a nice idea that they came up with doing that. And of course your transfer bar comes out. Pretty simple. I would take the bolt out, but this screw in the thumb piece is really, really tight. It might be rusted, it might be cross-threaded. I don't see any staking on it, like it's been pinned in place, but it doesn't want to come out. I'm not really inclined to force it. Your firing pin is here in the back, and what's kind of strange to me on that is that it's held in with a pin, but it's in a blind hole, so I guess you have to take some pliers or something and just yank that out. A little bit strange. Now, one other neat thing here is that now, since we've taken out the crane, the cylinder stop just falls out of the gun whenever you turn it in the right direction. So really easy to get the cylinder stop out, which I thought was kind of clever. Just interesting ways to go about designing it. You know, it's not what I expected to find inside. It's very much its own revolver. It's not really a Colt, at least not the Colts I'm familiar with. It's not a Smith & Wesson, at least not the Smith & Wessons I'm familiar with. It is quite a bit different. Now, one other thing I want to talk about is this top stud on the hand. I keep forgetting that. Is what it does is it interferes with the front of the bolt here to where it locks the trigger whenever the bolt is forward. Let's see if we can start putting this back together, and I will show you how that's working. I was going to do this as 2 videos, but we'll just do it as 1. It's not really that big of a deal, I guess. Figure if you want to watch part 1, you probably want to watch part 2 anyway, so. How's the best way to go about this? Sorry, I'm not really an expert on these. I'm kind of just learning them. I don't really take apart Taurus revolvers particularly often. Okay, so putting the hand back on, it just goes like that. And it's a little hole there on the back of the trigger. I'm going to try to just basically get the transfer bar lined up as best I can where it probably ought to be. And as I'm putting this back together, I'm just going to try to get it onto that. It's a little bit of a tricky operation here. Hope I'm not blocking it with my head. Start down. Move the slide stop up. I don't have that up quite high enough. Okay, there's a slide, or did I say slide stop? There's a cylinder stop out of the way. I don't know what I'm doing. Just ignore me. Let's see if I can get that just resting there. Maybe I can get this down to where it needs to be. Ooh, I went too low, I think. Let's see. Is that right? Okay, I think I got it. Let's see if that'll work. And it does. But you'll see while I'm pulling the trigger here, it's not getting up high enough to actually cover the firing pin. And the reason for that is this top stud on the hand is hitting the bolt. I have to actually pull the bolt back as if it had the cylinder in it in order to get that to come up all the way. So it's essentially a trigger lock, which I think is kind of a funny way of doing that. It's sort of cool. Yeah. So that's that. Go ahead and put the hammer back in. Usually get about the halfway mark here. Something about like that. Pull back on the thumb piece and it comes down in. Boom. Let it cycle through. We're backed into a decocked position now. Go ahead and put my trigger pin back in, or trigger spring. Just making all kinds of mistakes today, aren't I? Go ahead and pull the hammer back part way. Okay. Get that kind of lined up. Pull back on the trigger, push it down in. We're in. Pull back, relieve the tension off of the paper clip, and let it forward. And that is right. There's a taper on this that needs to sit down into the hole in the frame. And you need to make sure that's flush, otherwise you can't get the side plate back on. Go ahead and put hammer spring back in. Do that, pull back on the thumb piece, get the hammer starting to cock. Put that in there. Pull back on the hammer until we relieve tension and let it forward again. That's all back together. Let's make sure that everything is seated down in where it's supposed to be. The transfer bar will float kind of loose in there. You can hear it rattle. That is normal. We currently don't have any spring tension on the cylinder stop because of not having that plunger back in, which I think is really kind of the neat part of the design. I like that. Even though it's what caused the problem on this, that was really just due to 30 years without maintenance. So can't hardly blame the revolver for that. spin the extractor star until it lines back up where it needs to. In with the spring, down it goes. Center pin spring, on it goes. The extractor rod, just going to hold tension on the back of the face there of the star, push it in, and we're going to go counterclockwise in order to tighten it. You feel a little bit of resistance initially as that spring's kind of just finding its home, but then it goes in nice and smoothly. We'll take the plunger here that works against. Can I just push this in here and let you see how that works? Yeah. So that's where the plunger sits, right in there, that pushes against the cylinder stop. I'm going to put it back in here. And I'd be lightly oiling these parts if this was going to be a permanent reassembly. I'm just not going to do that on video for you guys because I don't think you want to sit around and watch me put oil on this thing. It seems boring. Probably even more boring than this already is, watching a guy fumble around with a Taurus 85, huh? But if you're watching me do it, I appreciate you. Thanks for the dedication to such a thing. Like and subscribe if you haven't, although if you're watching this, you're probably a dedicated subscriber because we're just sitting around checking out cheap revolvers and learning about them. So you gotta be one of the gun nerds to get into this, really, I think. And this side plate is very tight. It kind of has a sweet spot where it likes to pop back in. There it is. Perfect. I'm just gonna go back in with my side plate screws, backspin, hear the click, come back in. Not going real tight on it, just kind of getting it into place. I'll come back and tighten them once they're all in. Backspin, hear the click. Just gently start to tighten. For the front screw, make sure that the crane is pushed all the way back in the frame, that you don't have any play there. No debris or anything in the way. We're feeling good. Hear the click. And go back in. Okay, get a little snug. A little snug. If you have problems getting the side plate back on, check that little stud that goes in the frame from the end of the trigger pin. If that is sitting a little bit proud, you might need to just tap it in a little bit. Otherwise, it'll interfere with the side plate seating all the way. So those are all back in. I'll go back with the grips real quick. We're wrapping this thing up in just a second here. Probably gonna be a long video, but oh well, it's kind of a freebie. It's the second video this week, so you get what you pay for. But if you enjoy this kind of stuff, like and subscribe, leave your comments. I'll probably do a future video now that we've done this, comparing the 85 side by side with the Smith Wesson J frame, just to show the differences, just like that, so that you can really see that they're quite a bit different. And some things I like better about Smith & Wesson. Some things, Taurus actually has some good ideas. I'm wondering who gets credit for some of this, because I did a little bit of Googling and couldn't really find much. So some clever design aspects. We see that we're locking up. And I'll take this apart again and oil everything before I put it away, but just thought you guys might like to see that. And thanks for watching. Check back for the next one. Bye.